who are working to open schools in probably one of the most challenging times we've ever had, and keep English learners at the heart of what you're doing. On top of that, we have wildfires in parts of our state, we have extreme heat, and here you are putting in your time to see to it that English learners are really addressed in the learning and attendance plans. So thank you for being here. I'm Lori Olson. I'm the design team lead of ELRISE, and I'm here with you today with two presenters from San Diego County Office of Ed, our good partners and friends, Olympia Kyriakidis and Isela Jacobo. We are going to, there we go. There are over 100 people on our call, and so even though we would love to just have this be discussion, open discussion, we're going to need to rely on the chat box. And so please, we want to hear from you. Add your comments, add your questions, let us know what resources you have in the chat box. We'll be responding to what's in the chat box when we can, and there will be small group discussions as we go. But please let us know what you're thinking and the resources you have to share. The English Learner Roadmap is, as you know, our comprehensive visionary state English learner policy since 2017 that superseded Prop 227. And it was intended to guide us, to guide our local programs, our policies, and our planning for English learner success. And so now, especially now, as we're planning in response to the very sudden challenges and somewhat overwhelming challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, again, the roadmap is meant to be a guide for us. Knowing this, the legislature funded 2 educator workforce incentive grants in the state for English Learner Roadmap implementation. ELRISE received 1 of the grants. ELRISE stands for English Learner Roadmap Implementation for Systemic Excellence. It's a collaboration of Californians Together, Loyola Marymount Center for Equity for English Learners, SEAL, and 20 county offices of ed throughout the state. And our purposes are really to increase knowledge of the roadmap, to increase skills and strategies for implementing what we know are evidence-based practices, and also supporting the development for shared vision and priorities for local planning. And so it's really this priorities of local planning piece that we're going to be focusing on today as we really think about how to plan for this time of COVID. Over the next 3 years, ELRISE is going to be providing professional learning, webinars, institutes, workshops, strands for all kinds of multiple roles, whether you're a teacher, an administrator, a family member, or a counselor. We'll be providing technical assistance and facilitation, really to support all of you. And it's starting with today, which is our very first webinar for the state, as you prepare to take on creating your learning continuity and attendance plan. It's our task, it's our responsibility, all of us as a state, to figure out how we're going to plan for and get through these next 6 months to a year in a way that's really not just a miscellaneous collection of whatever ideas we happen to come across, but that's really informed by the vision, guided by the principles of the English Learner Roadmap policy. We need to see this as a vehicle for really implementing what we know are best practices for English learners and responding to the lessons that have been learned in the spring and over the summer about what it really means to respond to this new challenge. So here we are, COVID's out there, up there in the corner, out there lurking. We're in the middle of August now, which is where the red star is. We have till September 30th to complete these plans, and then our county offices of ed have another month to respond to us with recommendations and ways to really strengthen them. And as we're working, we assume that you know about and can access from CDE website, the templates, the formal templates, the official guidance, etc. Today, that's not what our goal is. Today, our goal is to move beyond that and to really share with you what we know from research as best practice, what we know from lessons learned need to be guiding us, and then to go step by step through the different sections of the template and talk about where and how these things can show up. Over the last 4 or 5 months, there's actually been a fair amount of guidance that's come out to the field from various researchers, advocacy groups, et cetera, about what's important for English learners in distance learning and in hybrid learning and in the context of the pandemic. And it can be very confusing to read all of those things and stay on top of all of those, but actually there's a set of really consistent guidance that flows across all of them that we need to keep in mind as we approach our plans. The first is the importance of prioritizing the students with the greatest needs, including English learners. And by prioritizing, we mean seeing to it that resources, the time, that we're really paying attention to what those needs are and that those take center stage in our planning. Strong stakeholder engagement, not just in the development of the plans, but as we are living through this time and really being sure that we are together in communicating about what's working and what's not. Support for families as the partners they are and need to be as children are learning at home as well as online with their teachers. Emphasizing relationship and community building and personalization. We need to have systems of guidance and support for teachers so that they are implementing best practices for English learners within the distance and hybrid learning context. We need to ensure that there's access to equipment and materials and learning supports, be meeting socio-emotional and basic needs, affirming and supporting the development of home language, and paying attention to the full spectrum from early education up through 12th grade. And indeed, the template itself is designed to try to hone in on some of these issues. In addition to that research, there's been looks at what we've learned in our experience so far. Californians Together did an analysis of the COVID-19 written reports, looking really for the degree to which those written reports that were done over the summer actually address English learner needs. They sampled 80 school districts across the state, serving 45% of California's English learners, and they found a couple key lessons about gaps that had been identified. One of them is we need to intentionally call out integrated and designated ELD. It's not being adequately addressed. Secondly, we need to emphasize in our pedagogy and our instruction and what teachers are doing, live interactive instruction that focuses in on oral language and discourse and relationship building. We need to address the digital divide, proactively support family collaboration, focus on the socio-emotional, and not forget early childhood education. So these two things bookend each other. The gaps that we found in reports and what research is telling us is really important. We've prepared for you two tools that put all of this together for you. Tool number one, which is referred to in the chat, so you can click on it whenever you want. If you look at the first column, it lists those best practices for English learners. What are the things that we know from research, et cetera? The second column links those to the English Learner Roadmap principle. The third, which is important because this is how we know we've got policy behind us. This is how we know that we're really aligning ourselves with the policy of the state. The third column are some examples of actions that really enact that best practice. And the fourth column is where it fits in the template itself. So you can see prioritizing students with greatest needs, including English learners, is aligned to the second English Learner Roadmap principle. There's some examples of actions designated and ensuring that we're doing designated ELD in all delivery models, extra periods for small group designated ELD, et cetera. Where does that fit? Oh, in the pupil learning loss section. And it also appears in the continuity of learning in-person instructional offerings and the distance learning sections as well. Our second tool that we're offering to you goes at it from the different direction. It says, let's just look at it section by section as you're working your way through this template and really thinking about your plans. If you're working on stakeholder engagement, for example, look in the left column. You can see here's some examples of services and actions that really address the needs of English learners. It's our hope that these two tools will help you as you approach the all-important task of really creating plans that are going to meet the needs of our English learners. We want to give you a little time before we then go through the template bit by bit to really chew on this. We're going to put you into breakout rooms. It's the first of 3 times you'll be in breakout rooms to talk about this. But first, a few norms for the breakout rooms. Keep your focus on the prompt questions, which I'm going to be showing you in a minute. Be sure everyone has a chance to talk, ask questions, etc. There will be a Google slide in each breakout room for note-taking, and particularly if you're identifying resources you think others should know about, please put those on those Google slides so that we can share them with everybody. Be sure to assign a representative to share out. Oh, no, we're not going to share out actually from this one. That's just a general norm. And you do have, if you see that last bullet, breakout room notes for where you can be keeping these notes. It's also in the chat room. So for this first breakout, we're asking you to spend about 10 minutes to just think about, I laid out for you some of those key messages from research and experience and those key gaps that we need to heed. What particularly resonates to you, seems really important to you? What key messages, principles, or mantras are guiding you and your district right now in sharing the plans for English learners? Is it prioritize, those greatest need? What are the key messages? And where are you turning for guidance as you're trying to figure out your distance learning, hybrid learning, continuity of learning planning? So those are the three things. Enjoy this time in your breakout room with each other. And when we come back, we'll be going bit by bit through the template. Thank you.
Breakout rooms. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Olympia Kirikides, and I'm here with the San Diego County Office of Ed, and I'm here with my wonderful colleague, Gisela Jacobo. And it is our great pleasure to be here with you this afternoon to share some ideas on how you can populate the template for your learning continuity plans. So we wanted to start with a quote today from Hugh Vasquez at the National Equity Project. Since we know that disturbance is required for change, and there is no doubt that disturbance is happening as we speak, the question is, are we willing to use this opportunity to create the kind of educational system we want? We have learned that if we are going to change a system, we as individuals first have to see what the system is producing. Then we have to engage with others to design something different. And finally, we have to act. And it is that action that we hope to capture in our plans, and that we really think about as we craft our plans, that we lead with vision, that we look and think beyond the crisis, beyond the moment, to the true systems that we want to create for our students, and that we truly embrace our English learners and put them at the heart of our plans as we write them and design them. So the plan is broken into several components, and what we're going to do today is go through the various components where we feel it would be a great fit to really bring in the English learner perspective and make sure we're meeting their needs. And so those sections are stakeholder engagement, continuity of learning, pupil learning loss, mental health and social emotional well-being, pupil and family engagement, and increase or improve services for foster youth, English learners, and low-income students. So we hope this actual presentation with the tools created by ELRISE will be useful to you as you populate the tools. So how we are crafting the rest of this presentation is we are going to go through each of these components of the plan, and we're going to share with you sections of the template. Then we're going to go back and pull some of the guidance from the ELRISE tools that will be in, that we're bringing into the presentation so that we're thinking about. And then what Gisela and I actually did was we put ourselves in your shoes and said, what would be some of the things we would want to add to the plan that would really meet the needs of the English learners, thinking about these wonderful recommendations and tools and best practice brought forth by ELRISE. So we put a little language in there as an example, and then we've also added for each section some resources that can help guide you to further think about the plans and even implement the plans as you move forward in your systems. So the first section we're going to discuss is stakeholder engagement. And this is the language from the template, and we really wanted to highlight here the efforts to reach pupils, families, educators, and other stakeholders who do not have internet access or who speak languages other than English. So there has to be a real effort to engage all families, even those without internet access. So that has to be woven into the plan, and that we are making sure we're addressing all our families with each language that they might not speak in our system. And so again, bringing in some suggestions from the tools that were shared with you, those wonderful tools. Providing translation and interpretation, especially for DLAC input sessions, and then creating listening sessions with EL students to really seek to understand their perspective as they're experiencing, they're our end user, right? Our families are who we're trying to meet the needs of. What is their experience? And are we having listening sessions to truly understand their experience, not only now at the beginning, but throughout this process and as we implement our plans? And so one of the things we might write in the section around stakeholder engagement, a description of the efforts made to solicit stakeholder feedback would be really to deepen our understanding of English learner students, families, and their perspectives and experiences. And so one thing we might think about doing is to conduct empathy interviews, not only digitally, virtually, but also by phone if we can't reach our families, if they don't have internet access, that we might even seek to do empathy interviews by phone. So that might be something we might choose to write into our plans. And what we linked in here was a tool. So every time you see blue and then underline here, there's a tool here linked for you. So we brought in some slides and some ideas around creating empathy interviews for this purpose that might be useful to you and that you might help guide you in doing so to really understand the perspectives of our families. So each time, again, we'll be referencing several resources and tools that we've linked into the presentation itself. And in the next section for stakeholder engagement, it really talks about how you're going to create different options for participation. And so here we spoke to thinking about different platforms, times of day, accessibility, closed captioning, all the different things, multiple languages, interpretation, recordings, and different things that you might want to think about including in your plan. And the next section is continuity of learning. This is a really large section of the plan, so there's several components to this part of the plan. And the main way that it's broken up is with distance learning or in-person learning. But we created this visual because we feel there's like a continuum of learning that could exist. On one end, all distance, and on one end, like we were, mostly in person, but that really there's this blended learning environment that should be described when we are able to be back in person, that really leverages the resources as we strive to meet the guidance from the state around how to stay safe and keep our students and staff safe, that we really need to think about this blended learning environment that we need to configure and put the needs, as was shared earlier, of our English learners first and foremost as we create these environments. And so these are some of the different sections. Again, there's two main components, in-person and distance learning. And then there's the subcomponents within the template of each section. And we wanted to go for a moment into the minutes, and I'm going to transition to my colleague, Isela Jacobo, who will jump in here.
Good afternoon, everyone. So again, as I begin this section, we would like to bring your attention to the CDE instructional time requirements by grade level, and just keep those in mind as we continue to further our understanding of this particular section in the plan. Next slide. From this section of the template, we understand the need to describe the actions the LEA will take to offer classroom-based instruction whenever possible, with special attention to students who have experienced significant learning loss due to school closures or at a greater risk of experiencing further learning loss. With that in mind, and utilizing the ELRISE tools, we would like to emphasize the following bullets. So opportunities for us, definitely prioritizing direct teacher instruction for our English learners, scheduling dedicated designated ELD time and integrated ELD in all delivery models, targeting instructional support for ELs who need it through various options, such as tutoring and small group instruction. Again, all ideas coming from the ELRISE tools. As we move on to the next slide, you'll see a few more. And if you can please notice that for the next set of ideas, we are prioritizing EL as we create schedules and resource allocations in our plans. We're maintaining the integrity of the model and the support for the LIM bilingual programs, and we're putting special focus on the professional learning opportunities that our teachers and administrators must experience in order to be able to respond the way they need to respond to our English learner needs. Next slide. So this section of the template will call for the actions to in-person instructional offerings. And this is one of those examples that Olympia pointed out, in which our sample action is truly focused on designated ELD. So making sure that that first teaching for designated ELD, it's happening via small groups that are differentiated by proficiency levels. The next slide will provide you with other examples in response to the same section. And what we would like to highlight here is how we call out very specific actions such as daily integrated ELD via GLAD strategies with a focus on oracy by designing and incorporating opportunities for all students to engage in sustained quality discourse every day in all content areas. Recognizing that to effectively implement such actions, the focus of our English language development professional learning opportunities that need to be made available to our teachers and our administrators need to be focused on key considerations for EL instruction, such as the ones you see listed on this one slide. Next slide. So this next section of the template will focus on the continuity of instruction through a distance learning program. And the sample action that we would like to highlight here again calls for designated ELD first teaching to be provided through synchronous instruction via small groups that are differentiated by proficiency level, and leveraging asynchronous instruction in support of the learning that happens during synchronous learning. Next slide. Again, recognizing that this type of services, the services we're describing in our action items, will require very focused English language development professional learning, coaching, collaboration, and planning opportunities that are made available to teachers and administrators around some of the key ideas that you see on this one slide. On slide 37, we go a little bit deeper on the specific considerations that need to be made for synchronous instruction as related to designated ELD. And you'll notice again that we provide you with a number of different ideas that might be the focus of your ELD professional learning, collaboration, and planning opportunities. The next slide serves the same purpose, except that this time we're bringing forward ideas that we feel are key for asynchronous learning to be as successful as possible. Again, really emphasizing that designated ELD lives in synchronous learning, and through asynchronous learning, we'll be supporting the learning that happens during synchronous learning designated ELD. So the next slide serves the purpose of exemplifying the design that we feel teachers should engage with as they're providing further access to their students. We would like you to please notice that we have a slide for elementary and another one for middle school. And again, in order for our teachers, our educators, to be able to produce this level of, to provide this level of support and scaffolding for our students, it'll be essential that focused professional learning is provided, and that this emphasizes not only key considerations for EL, but also the functionalities that will allow for higher student engagement and production. Next slide. The next two slides are basically sample schedules that we are setting forth with, again, the idea of sharing with you some of the essential components that must exist in an English language development schedule, noticing how synchronous and asynchronous are in support of each other, but more than anything else, recognizing, again, implications for professional learning opportunities for our staff, in order for them to be able to address each and every one of the components that you see here. And on the next slide, which shows an example of dual language instruction sample schedules. Again, this will require focused focused professional learning, as well as centering our discussions around data, in ensuring that our schedules are so dynamic, and always in response of our student needs. Next slide.
Before we go on, next slide, I just wanted to point out, Isela, that again, the blue underlined elements, the titles on both the slides that had the lesson examples and the schedules are links that take you far more in depth and give you more information as a resource.
Thank you for that, Olympia, because we do recognize that that font is extremely small. So yes, please use those links. So this next section of the template will bring our attention to distance learning professional development. And again, our sample action brings a focus to the need for ongoing professional development for both teachers and administrators that supports the design and implementation of a comprehensive ELD program, including purposeful integration of educational technology. The next slide recognizing again that the sample actions we're giving you call for professional learning, coaching, and collaboration that is very strategic, in which we continue to put front and center the need for high expectations with high levels of support for all our English learners. The next slide. So for this particular section, the actions that are being called for are within the distance learning program, but in response to pupil participation and progress. So you'll notice that the sample actions that we have listed here, our goal is to emphasize small group and one-on-one formative assessment on student language development progress. We also want you to please notice how this sample or the sample actions that you see listed here are very specifically addressing students with low tech and no tech. So given the needs of such audience, we need to ensure that considerations are being made for them throughout the plan. On our next slide, again, within that same section, we want to bring your attention to examples of actions that are very specific to a variety of EL typologies. For example, newcomers, long-term ELs, and dually identified students on the next slide. This particular slide is also an example of how we would create action items that would bring a heavy emphasis to our dually identified students. We would like you to please notice the focus of our actions on extended learning opportunities for students, as well as data-driven, ongoing SPED and general ed meetings to collaborate, reflect, refine, and adjust instructional practices as dictated by student needs. On the next slide, so within the same section, you'll be asked to address and describe student assessment, as well as measure pupil participation in work. So what we're doing for this, or the resources we bring forward to you on the next slide. So recognizing that for students to show up for instruction and genuinely engage in learning, learning has to begin with strong student connections. We recognize as well that engaging instruction for EL will require that the instructional experiences that we design for them confirm that we have high expectations for them, that we provide them with the high levels of support that they all need, that we connect the instruction to their lives in many meaningful ways as we leverage their funds of knowledge, that we ensure that the content that we're setting forth for them is culturally relevant, and that we definitely give them voice and choice in the design that we're developing. So recognizing this, we bring forward to you the CCE, SDCOE integrated and thematic units that were designed by our teams to inform your delivery of synchronous and asynchronous instruction. As an example of what an engaging blended experience might look like, we want to bring your attention to the way in which through these units, we're connecting learning to our students, and by bringing learning that it's meaningful for them, ensuring their attendance, ensuring their participation. On the next slide, which is slide 50, you'll find a link to the K-12, again, CCEE, SDCOE distance learning units. I do want to also put emphasis on the fact that all of these units will incorporate designated ELD lessons that are absolutely aligned to the rest of the content area learning. On the next slide, you'll find a few more resources from SDCOE that our peers, our colleagues have put together to support us in the design of our plans. And this brings us to our next breakout. So as Dr. Olson reminded us earlier, there's norms that we're gonna be following during our breakouts. And at the very last bullet, you'll notice the bit.ly that will bring you to the note-taking document. If we move on to the next slide, you'll find your prompts. So what we're gonna be engaging with our colleagues right now is in response to the following two prompts. So what ideas and approaches to these sections, meaning stakeholder engagement and continuity of learning, of the learning plan, seem most interesting and exciting to you? And we would also like to hear from you as far as what other key actions are you including in your learning plan for these sections? Thank you for engaging with your group, and we will see you in about 10 to 12 minutes. Have fun.
around the first two parts of the template that we shared with you, stakeholder engagement, and that really big section on continuity of learning with all those different subcomponents that are easy to get lost in, that describe both in-person and distance learning experiences. So now we're going to transition to the next section of the template that we'd like to share with you, which is pupil learning loss. And I know I'm not in present mode, and that's by design because I want to share a couple tools with you, and then I'll go into present mode. So in the pupil learning loss, the template shares with us the importance of measuring not only academic, like language, ELA and math, but also English language development. So it's called out within the template that we need to assess learning loss in both language development and in academics. The different sections within this part of the template, pupil learning loss, the section overview, there's 3 additional subsections: pupil learning loss strategies, effectiveness of implemented pupil learning loss strategies, and actions, those specific actions that you list within them about what you're going to do to address pupil learning loss. For this section, it's really important if we're going to be understanding the learning loss that has occurred and how we can accelerate learning, because it's not our students' fault, right? That this whole experience, so we want to make sure that we're using an equity lens here and not labeling students as having, you know, done something wrong, but really we just need to understand where they are so we can meet their needs and accelerate learning for them and help bridge any gaps that might exist and leverage any strengths that may exist. So it's really important to assess based on your program too. If you are a dual language program, you should assess in both English and in the target language to see where students are. And so there's some suggestions here on assessment and monitoring. And what I really wanted to share and highlight with you here is the tool. So what we've linked in here, let me go back to sharing. So we've linked inside the presentation a tool that we've created that lists several language assessments, mostly computerized, in both English and in the target language to help you understand how your students are progressing in English, and if you're in a dual language program or a world language program, in the target language. So we've also linked in here, which I won't open, there's some great guidance and assessments from CDE for assessing academics during these times. So these tools here will help you mitigate that learning loss and help accelerate learning for your English learners. And as we think about this pupil learning loss section, it's really important to continue to think about the good practices and the frameworks that we have, that we've always used and need to continue to think about, like MTSS, and understanding that continuum of learning from universal support to supplemental to support to intensified support, and understanding all, some, and few. And this visual here also has a link to more guidance around MTSS. So it's very important to understand for English learners, ELD lives with all English learners. It's not a some and a few. It's not a supplemental or an intensified. It's part of the core. So it's very important to understand. But if we're assessing and we still see that students are further behind in different sections, how might we add that supplemental support and that intensified support for our dually identified students? And so again, referring back to the toolkit. So what we're showing you here is a rhythm as you think about your template of looking at the template, breaking it down, seeking to understand what are some things we might need to do, looking back to the ELRISE tools that have been given to you to think of some, to just get our ideas going. And here we're highlighting targeted instructional support for students who have experienced learning loss through various options such as learning hubs, individual tutoring, small group instruction, etc. And then extended learning enrichment sessions, maybe in a home language and leveraging that language as an asset. So those are some ideas from the tools that then we would think about, well, what would we write in what would we actually write? So then taking that inspiration and that research and that best practice and actually populating the template with what we can do here. And we've just given you some examples about interventions and small groups, and really leveraging that ELD for students and being very strategic. So we're going to move now to the next section, which is on mental health and social emotional well-being. I'm going to present that now. And so these are just a few of the challenges that students are experiencing. Food insecurity, unsafe home living environment, job responsibilities, maybe an unsafe work environment. Our families are often the ones who are out there in the workforce currently. Many distractions in the home, depression and or substance abuse, limited technology, books and resources, limited English language skills, and maybe fears regarding documentation status. So these are just a few of the potential challenges emotionally and physically that are affecting our families. So then really just having some guiding questions around this section would be very useful, and thinking about what already exists in our system to support our students and our staff for their social emotional needs. But what might be still needed? What supports mental health curriculum, for example, social emotional learning, assessments, interventions, referrals, what might still be needed? And then what professional learning might be necessary for the adults in the system to support both students and staff? And again, we go back to the tools and thinking about some of the ideas that are there for us, providing curriculum units that really emphasize building relationships and connections, providing units and lessons that incorporate social emotional learning, professional learning that really gives people what they need to help do these types of supports and interventions, and leveraging our counselors and the communication that's so needed with our families, just so that they know how to access the resources and tools that might be available, because there might be a gap between them even knowing about them and knowing how to access them and getting what they need to be able to thrive in these times. And so it's also, as we think of assessing and understanding where our students and our families are, it's important to think about monitoring wellness, not just thinking about this as we start the school year, but throughout the year and incorporating that into our plans as well. How do we know that wellness is continuing for our families and our students? So there's some competencies, SEL competencies, that you can align some assessment in both informative and summative ways to see how our students are doing. And then we've also linked in here some social emotional look-fors in distance learning that might be useful in populating this part of the template. And so here, instead of actually writing to the prompt, we again added some guiding questions and a really useful tool to help you think about how to populate this section. So the mental health and well-being for all section in the CDE Stronger Together, a guidebook for the safe reopening of California's public schools, are some great recommendations for help and ideas for helping to populate this part of the template. And then we're moving to the next section within the learning continuity and attendance plan, pupil and family engagement. Again, we look to our tools at ELRISE, and they guide us to plan carefully to ensure English learners have access to materials, equipment, internet, and supplies needed to participate, engage, and learn, including resources in their home languages. Supporting families as partners and supporting student learning with clear and regular communication, technical support, workshop strategies in their home languages. This is more important than ever, that we look at our families and our students as our partners in this journey together for this school year. We really need to lift their agency. So much time, the school day is so reduced, and the times that, especially for that synchronous opportunities, is going to be very flexible. And we really need to make sure that students and families have what they need to participate actively and as our partners in their learning. So understanding learning goals, for example, academic and linguistic learning goals would be very important here for parents and students to be our partners. So again, thinking this might be what I might write in the plan. Thinking about things like reimagining our parent, student, teacher compacts, right? Thinking about really ensuring that everybody understands the role that they can play to make sure students are successful, and that they themselves, our students, their agency is lifted and their participation, they have that voice and choice that Isela spoke to, that they feel empowered and that they actively are able to engage. And so just thinking about things like student-led conferences to highlight their progress, project-based learning, things that will really, again, get them to actively be engaged, because that's how they'll be attending. If the students need to make sure that they're turning in their work or able to log on or able to call in to participate, and that's how attendance will be documented. So we have to hope that we're culturally responsive and engaging to our families. And again, they understand, and our students, how to actively participate. And then this is the final section that we're going to cover as far as the plan goes. And here it's clear. The section is called Increased or Improved Services for Foster Youth, English Learners, and Low-Income Students. So I want to emphasize, this should not be the only section that we write about English learners. So we went through all of this, going through the different sections: stakeholder engagement, continuity of learning, pupil learning loss, mental and physical well-being, parent, and student engagement, and this part about increase or improve services. English learners should live in all of it, not just this section. So this is really, we're emphasizing here the language from the template, which is in yellow, that the needs of foster youth and English learners, which we've bolded, and low-income students were considered first, and how these actions are effective in meeting the needs of these students. So for example, if we're going to think about our day, our instructional day, putting the needs of our English learners in the forefront, and really making sure we're carving out that dedicated time for designated ELD, carving out the time that really might need to be there, and the teacher trying to find a way to leverage our resources, all that's at our fingertips, all that we can be innovative about, to make sure that we're trying to meet the needs of our English learners in the intervention times and whatever supports they might need, that is being emphasized here. What do we need to do above and beyond the core, and that we are putting the needs of our English learners first, including things like professional learning that might be needed, additional assessment tools that might be needed. What do we need to do to ensure we're putting our English learners at the forefront? So now it's time for another breakout session. And we've gone over the norms before, and here are your questions. So I don't see the link here. So can someone type that in the chat box for a moment to the slides? So what ideas seem particularly exciting or important to you to include in the pupil learning loss, mental health, socio-emotional well-being, pupil and family engagement, outreach, and increased or improved services section of the plan? And what else do you think should go into those sections of the plan in order to embrace our English learners?
Welcome back, everybody, and thank you for hanging in. I know it's a lot. All these best practices, all of these adaptations to COVID, all of this distance learning, following the template, trying to get it all done and in by September 30th. I know it's really a lot amidst heat waves and wildfires, and you're just awesome and amazing to show the kind of commitment and passion for our English learners to really insist that we're going to do this right. We will, we can, and we hope that we have been able to give you resources that'll really help with it. I want to share with you just a few other things. You are going to, I know in the chat people are saying, are we going to get the resources? So yes, you will. The materials will be coming to you in a separate follow-up email, which will include things that we've added from the chat, things we've added from the Google notes that were taken in your small groups. And so you will get it all, PowerPoint and all, with all of its, with all of the links that are there. So we look forward to continuing to give you support. Can I have the next slide, please? Coming up in the next month and a half, ELRISE is continuing to do these webinars, online responses to the very immediate needs that you're all facing. We're going to be continuing with the series for administrators, with one on reopening schools for distance learning and how to embrace English learners through that. And then a further on one on supporting English learner families and knitting strong school partnerships in a pandemic era. You do have the link here for registration, but also your county offices have information about it as well so that you can register for those. Next slide. In addition to the ones for administrators, we're offering a series for teachers, 2 series for teachers. These are individual, this slide refers to individual ones for teachers. One on creating welcoming, inclusive, and affirming classrooms for English learners and how essential that is in a distance learning context and how to really pull it off in that kind of context. A second one on critical conditions for English learners during distance learning, which really focuses in more on instruction. Go back one slide, please. Yeah. And the third one for teachers on building and sustaining family partnerships. Each of those will be offered twice because we know teachers' schedules are so difficult to know when they're going to be available. And they will also be archived. You do not need to register for all three of those. You can register for whichever one you want and choose the date. In addition to that series, there's one other for teachers. Next slide, please. Which is for teachers in dual language programs, specifically because of the challenge of how to get started in kindergarten and first grade dual language two-way programs with language immersive conditions and what that really means to start the journey toward bilingualism for those little ones through distance learning. This is a two-part series, so you register for both of them. The first one on partnering with families in that first month in a dual language program, kindergarten and first grade, and the second one planning for biliteracy and for Spanish dual language programs, K1. Again, these each have two different dates, so teachers can decide which one they are available and works best for them, and the registration information is here. As ELRISE, we really look forward to the day when we can be back in rooms with you all and working in that kind of close connection, just like we all wish we could be with our students. In the short term, we hope we will continue to be doing webinars and trying to meet your needs. And in the long term, over the next couple of years, we look forward to returning to real direct contact with you. So next slide, please. We would like you, just so we have a sense what you got from this and also what's in your heart and what's in your mind as you're facing your learning continuity plans for English learners. We'd love to just hear just one thing that you feel, if you can get into that plan, will have a huge impact for your English learners. Please put those in the chat. We'd like to be able to put those together and assemble those. And finally, while you're doing that, the last slide, please. We invite you to contact us, to contact ELRISE to find out what else we're doing, to contact ELRISE if you need additional resources, if you have ideas for what we should be doing for the field to really support the implementation of the English Learner Roadmap and the kind of excellence for our English learners we know they deserve and need. You can also contact your county office of education. Again, 20 county offices of education are partnering with us, and they are a good source of information on what will be made available. So thank you to all of you. Stay well, stay healthy, and thank you.